I'm Brandon Shuman, the Dean of Arts and Humanities at Midland Classical Academy Upper School. And in an earlier video, we talked about what the vision of classical education is, the why of it, the telos of it, that it was about the pursuit of virtue or the cultivation of virtue and the building up of character. In this video, I'd like to go more into the depths of it, of what's the content of classical education and possibly the how of classical education. So the what behind classical education is broken down kind of into four parts. You have the subjects, virtue, skill, and love. Now the subjects are the kind of the first thing that strike you when you hear classical education. It's the looking at and the studying of kind of these ancient histories going all the way back to the Egyptians or the Greeks with the Alexanders and the Romans with the Ciceros and Caesars and the medieval history, doing languages like Latin and Greek instead of Spanish, or reading the great books. That's the thing that strikes us most when we talk about what is classical education. But as we talked about in the why of classical education, of trying to live the good life, the what is really the virtues of it. That's the main thing we're trying to cultivate: the wisdom, the courage, the temperance, the justice. And we've already talked about that, so I'm not going to go into great detail on that one here. But the third element of the what of classical education is skill. We're not interested in just kind of teaching our students to be able to regurgitate information and just tell them the things they need to know and then they puke that back on the assignment or the test. What we're really after in our classes is helping them learn how to think for themselves. We want our students to be able to discover the truth, the goodness, and the beauty for themselves. That way they can far surpass whatever it is that we know. We do want them to know things, but more than knowing things, we want them to know how they can learn and grow for themselves. And so in a history class, we're not just trying to have them be knowers of history, but help them how to become historians. Or in algebra, not just how do you solve for X, but how can you become an algebraian? And so it's not just in chemistry, you guys know where I'm going with this, it's not just do you know the periodic chart, but how can you become a chemist yourself? And so within all of that, it's the idea of students learning how to become self-learners. There's a kind of a famous quote that says, they know enough when they know how to learn for themselves. And that's really what it is that we're after. Because if our students learn how to learn for themselves, then that's the greatest gift that we can give them. And they're not limited or stunted by our own brilliance, or in often cases lack of brilliance. They can learn for themselves to whatever it is that God places in front of them, and whatever it is that life brings them. They can learn for themselves of what it is they need to know. And so those are the skills that we're going for within classical education that far surpasses mere knowledge or information. And then this fourth thing that we're about in terms of the what of classical education is, this is going to sound really dumb, but classical education is about love. And what we're trying to do for our students is cultivate a love for things that are true, good, and beautiful. And that's, again, part of that discovering greatness that MCA is about. We're not about mediocrity. We want to give people and give our students a real taste for the things that matter in life. And that's, again, the good, the true, and the beautiful. And a quote from the guy that wrote The Little Prince, I can't say his name very well. It's French. Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. I probably butchered that, but he is attributed this quote. He didn't really write this, but this thought came from one of his works. And he says this: if you want to build a ship, don't drum up people to collect wood, and don't assign them tasks and work, but rather teach them to long for the endless immensity of the sea. And that's the thing that we're going for. We want to cultivate a love for things that transcend the mere information and knowledge of whatever the subject is that we happen to be learning about. We want to give our students a longing for the things that matter in life, a longing for Christ, a longing for things that are good, true, and beautiful. And if they have that longing, if that becomes, if we can awaken what it says in Ecclesiastes, the eternity that God has planted into our hearts, then that will inspire and drive our students to become the men and women that God has created and designed them and is redeeming them to be. And so again, the what of classical education goes beyond just kind of those mere weird subjects that we teach. It is, again, part of the virtue of and character of wisdom, courage, temperance, and justice. It's about the skill of learning to think for yourself and indeed even becoming a self-learner, and then ultimately awakening this love that God has planted in them for things that are good, true, and beautiful. And that's the what of classical education. Now, the how of classical education is also important, and that probably the fundamental characteristic of the how of classical education is described as an active learning environment, where we want students actively participating in this learning process. We don't want them to be passive, where they just sit in a classroom quietly, stoically, where they're brain dead, just taking notes. We want them discussing the ideas. We want them engaged in what's going on, which is why we have contribution grades at the upper school of participating in the conversation and adding your own thoughts and opinions and questions and challenges to the learning process. At the grammar school, they do a lot of learning in math and focus, where they don't just kind of learn the rote way to do the math problems. There is a lot of memory work that's there, but beyond that, they learn some of the intangibles in the process of how to figure out these mathematical problems. I'm not the math guy, Mr. Perea is, so he can describe that better than I can, but you homeschool moms and dads that are going through that process, you know how inside and out that process can be. And so at the upper school, we often use this thing called the Socratic method, which comes from Socrates, who was one of the greatest teachers that ever lived. And he didn't teach by lecturing, which is largely what I'm doing right here, but he taught through simply asking questions and getting people to consider what their thoughts were on a subject. And then he would question their answers and say, well, how does this relate to that? And really just getting them engaged in that whole learning process and just creating an entire conversation or dialogue about the thing that they were trying to discover. And the goal wasn't to see who's right or who's smarter, but the goal was to discover, again, the things that are good, true, and beautiful. And so at the upper school, we gather around long tables and have conversations about the things that we're learning and creating this active learning environment when we're studying the Bible or history or a great books class. In math classes, they often get up on the board and start working problems out loud with the class's help, or demonstrating how to do a Euclidean geometry on the board. And so, again, active learning environment is a huge part of what makes classical education classical education. Now, this third thing, or the second thing about classical education and the how is called the Trivium. Now, some of you may have heard this word before. It's the Trivium is Latin for three, and it means the three. The Trivium refers to the three liberal arts. This is not talking about political arts, but it's more of the liberating arts, the freeing arts, the arts that make a person free. And the three liberal arts that classical education is organized around are grammar, logic, and rhetoric. We have a grammar school where the grammar is focused on intensely, and grammar is learning the basic facts, the data, picking up the pieces of information. Logic is seeing how those facts fit together in a system. It's understanding the relationship between one thing and another thing, or multiple things, and being able to juggle them all together. And rhetoric is the expression of those ideas, the articulation of it, of being able to share and re-communicate the truth that you've learned in your own way. And so no matter what subject you're learning, whether it's a new language or math or a sport, or one of my hobbies that I really enjoy, fly fishing, we learn through these three stages of learning: grammar, logic, and rhetoric. And so, like with fly fishing, You have to know what the individual pieces are when it comes to the grammar of it. You have to know this is what the line is, what the leader is, what a fly is, what a trout is, the thing you're trying to catch, what a river is or the currents are. And so grammar is kind of learning that basic information. It's very definitional in its nature of this is what this is. So the logic of fly fishing, it would be things like learning how to tie a fly, how to put the hook onto the line itself and tie the knot to where it's all together, or learning the art of casting and throwing the line where you want it to go. The rhetoric of fly fishing is actually doing the fishing itself. It's learning to read the wind, kind of consider where the shadows are coming, which direction the current's flowing, where the weeds are, and trying to just place that fly on the water just like a bug would, to where it drifts naturally to where you can snag the trout as soon as the instant that it bites. And so the rhetoric is really putting all of that stuff together, where you're using that information for a specific end. And so that's this trivium, these liberating arts, is it's the thing it's the process, it's the stages of learning. But when you think of arts, we often think of arts as like it's something that it makes. And so for instance, the art of music makes music. The art of painting makes a painting. But what do these liberating arts do? Like, what does the liberating art of grammar make? Well, really what the liberating art of grammar makes is it makes a definition of a thing. It says, this is what a fly is. This is what a trout is. This is the letter A. This is what addition is. It just gives you basic definitions. And good, solid, accurate grammar is the foundation. It's the roots of the whole thing. Because if you understand what a thing is accurately and truthfully, you have a good definition of what that thing is, then you have the capacity to really understand it and see how it relates to other things. If you have bad grammar and don't know what a thing is, then the whole project falls apart. The atheistic philosopher Nietzsche said in the 1800s, he said, "I still fear that we believe in God because we believe in grammar." And what he meant by that is not that we believe in our commas and our periods and our quotation marks, but we believe that there are real true definitions. We believe in absolutes. And so having good grammar is essential for the whole show. And you can see the breakdown that we're suffering in large part in society because we no longer know who a boy or a girl is. And so we're losing just what our standard for absolute truth. But grammar is really where it all starts. Logic is, if grammar harmonizes a definition to a thing, what logic harmonizes is it harmonizes multiple ideas together. Logic makes, as an art does, logic makes sense. It tells us how does this idea relate to this idea and this other idea. And logic, this logic phase often really kicks into gear about the time students turn into teenagers. They become a lot more argumentative, and that's not because they're necessarily being mean, but they really have this extra curiosity of wanting to know why and how things work together. And so that's just part of the way God made people, is that as they get to that 13, 14 year stage, that the logic phase really kicks into high gear of seeing how things fit together. And so again, logic makes sense. That's the thing that it makes. But what does rhetoric do, this third phase? Well, the rhetoric phase comes in physiologically around the time students turn 16 years old. And what rhetoric is again, it's the expression of ideas. It's the articulation of stating a person's opinion or take on the matter. And just like if you're going to have good rhetoric and a good opinion, an accurate opinion on it, you have to have good logic and good grammar. Those are the things that it's based on. What rhetoric seeks to do is it's not harmonizing a system and it's not harmonizing sense, but it's a much higher art where it harmonizes minds. It unites hearts and minds together. What rhetoric really makes or builds is community, and it brings and unites personalities together. It's not just saying how does this idea fit with this idea, but how can I persuade another person to understand what is good, true, and beautiful. Rhetoric is more than just speech. It's more than just persuasion. Rhetoric is really seeking to unite people together towards things that are good, true, and beautiful. We often think of somebody, when we say they're a rhetorician, we think of it in a negative light. The art of rhetoric is always positive. It's always community building. It's always for the good. It's sophists, or what the ancient Greeks called sophists, the know-it-alls that used to try to use their skills of understanding things to twist the truth in such a way that it benefited themselves to the harm of others. And so what we're seeking to do in building and teaching our students grammar, logic, rhetoric is we're not trying to produce sophists. We're trying to produce rhetoricians that love God and love others, as opposed to being people that are just self-serving and talented. And the most gospel-centered, or the most community-building idea is the gospel itself. The gospel is the thing that restores the fall. It's the thing. It's the message that unites people to one another. It reunites us back to God. It reunites us to our telos, and of knowing God and partnering with Him. And so this gospel is the most rhetorical message that the world has ever been given or ever will hear. And so learning how to express the gospel is in all manners of life is really critical. And so hopefully that gives you some vision of what classical education entails in terms of the subjects, the virtue, the skill, the love, and then the how of classical education, of this active learning and really this strong reliance and embrace of the trivium of grammar, logic, and rhetoric.